and we're recorded and started. I don't have the agenda doc open, Dion. Do you? Or I don't know if anybody added anything to that, or if we're going to go free form today.
There's probably going to be free form because there wasn't anything added on there when I checked last night, and still no agenda other than discuss the KubeCon North America activities.
Yeah.
Okay, so we were just talking about content for the deck. We're we already gave the CNCF our proposal, so we've got the abstract which has an agenda, and we were just talking about how we'd address that agenda in a slide deck. We also talked about, from my perspective, it went well that when we did this in Europe, we had an intermission because we have a back-to-back intro and deep dive. So the session is going to go close to 2 hours. And last time we asked the audience, we told them we were going to take a 5-minute break, and if they didn't have to leave the room to go use the restroom or something, that we earmarked a corner of the room for different use cases for IoT Edge, so people could meet others who have the same interests they did. And they seemed to get heavily into that. I mean, we had to force them to go back to their seats to restart the meeting, and a few of them told me afterward that they really liked meeting the birds of a feather with their use cases. So I think I'd like to do that again. And the other thing you inherently get out of it is you sort of have an inherent poll where we can see how many people associated with the group are interested in particular niches. And that's good to know if we're trying to get content for future meetings and future KubeCons. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts, ideas, or disagreements on that, but that's what I
no disagreement. I also thought that was a good experience for everyone there. They seem to like it, so I'm up for doing it again.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And what we might want to do if we have enough, people who are kind of consistent attendees is even after we divide, have people sit in the corners and kind of facilitate intros and things. But because I would have liked to get a report back on what the conversations were. I know we had a big group of telco people, small group of gaming people, I think.
Yeah.
And we
Industrial IoT were also, I think, fairly significant, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that made it difficult to have, there were a lot of after session conversations. I think one of the things that made it difficult to sustain them was that our place in the lineup was toward the close of the conference, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And so a lot of people were kind of starting to head out.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, we got a slot like that again, too.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, maybe we should let people know ahead of time, like at the start of the session, that we will be available afterward for vertically oriented breakouts, so that we could continue the birds of a feather that emerged during the session.
Yeah, an interesting thing. Let me actually look. I'll look. Give me a minute. I'll look it up in my calendar. But I thought it was Thursday. I'm just not sure because I had a few other talks and I don't remember which one was which. Oh yeah, we've got the last day in the afternoon.
Okay, again, all right.
So if anybody is tempted to leave early, they might leave before we get to ours. And I haven't looked for over a week, but right now, the last I looked, if you're a speaker, you can actually get the number of people who indicated that they're interested by making their schedule. It's a little early for that because a lot of people don't put their desired session list together till the week of the event. But the attendance list looked a little low. I'm giving other talks, and we've had in the past in North America at Seattle, we got 260 people into both the intro and the deep dive. So we've had really good attendance. But I think the number of people registered was below 40. Like I say, it's early, but I aspire to it being a couple hundred or more. But if you get that last of the conference slot, maybe that's a bad thing.
Yeah, a lot of people flying out already.
Yeah, I'm not leaving till like the day after myself. So, we'll see how it goes.
Well, we're just going to have to make some noise about the session then in order to get people to stick around and come in for this one.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. We'll look again at how many are registered when we're a week away, and then I think we'll get a good feel. And then some of us have other talks where we can potentially promote this.
Absolutely.
I guess I'm
I
giving
hear one
one
on Tuesday.
service mesh at Edge. It's peripherally related to this subject, but I can certainly point out that we've got this coming out. And I think there must be other people having Edge IoT-ish talks, but I didn't bother to look what they might be, but I think there must be some. There was actually one I thought of somebody talking, it sounded really interesting, a session on how to put together your own private LTE5 network. And I gathered that this is some idea where you just get the commercial off-the-shelf chips and things, and you can manage to become your own mobile telco, which sounded really fascinating.
So Steve, when you're ready, can you share your slides and then we can add more material there as we go?
Yeah, I'll do that by the end of the week. Right now I'm still editing, and I've had kind of intermittent bandwidth because I'm moving around at this conference, and you know what conference Wi-Fi is like.
Yeah. I think we need to at least submit something at least something until Monday, right? But
I think the 10th maybe, and then the way it goes, you can always replace it. I've always put my draft there just to have a shell. So you met the requirements of meeting the deadline, but I mean, I know in Europe, I think our last update was posted an hour before we went on stage. So
and I expect the same here, right?
Yeah. So we'll definitely get enough that people will have some idea of, and the CNCF. I think the CNCF's worry is that some speaker completely forgot about it and maybe wasn't attending. So they get some confidence that
something's
investing and putting something on the air, and they won't have like a no-show speaker.
So on the topic of the KubeCon North America activities, we had in the Slack for this working group a post from Jeff Young, who was organizing an out-of-conference event to get together. And I just put in the Slack, or sorry, in the Zoom chat, a link to the sign-up spreadsheet, which presently has 3 sign-ups. That would be me and Jeff himself and Dayan. So I think that if there is interest in getting together, because we often try to do a face-to-face, right? And we don't currently have any face-to-face organized other than this one. So since those usually go well and we like to do them, I'd like to encourage anybody who has not yet put their name on the list to put your name on the list so we can get some gravity around this. To use the Steve's word of the day, who's gravity.
Okay, I just added mine to the list. My only caveat is that I'm already obligated for some other face-to-faces. So I am putting together a face-to-face for VMware users, people who run Kubernetes on top of VMware infrastructure. And I'm planning on joining the storage SIGs, whatever meeting they might have after hours, just because I worked in that group for years, and it almost evolved to you feel like it's a friendship. So just want to see the people again, even though I haven't touched the storage area for a year or more now.
You're a popular guy. Well, maybe we'll try to organize this face-to-face around, a time that you can attend. I think there's a lot of value to add when you're present, so.
I think they have a pretty long lunch period too. And I'm not sure, even if they do feed us, sometimes food provided by Linux Foundation events could be improved upon. And maybe we can just go meet over lunch, because nobody
Yeah,
should have.
that's actually, I mean, that's what we did in Barcelona, except, I mean, that was
In Seattle as
sponsored.
well, yeah. Even if you don't have a sponsorship for lunch, we can just, try to dedicate a place and see who shows up, right?
Yeah. In fact, in Barcelona, I think a lot of the group went to that Huawei sponsored Cube Edge lunch, which was actually a really good event.
It was, and I think that was kind of took the place of the face-to-face. Well, we went from the face-to-face to the sponsored lunch, right? So, yeah. So let's. I like Dan. I like that idea. Let's pick a place and say we're going to go, and then that'll be the way that we do this face-to-face, and that way people already were going to break for lunch anyway.
Yeah, it sounds good, and I'll have to check. But if we only have 4 in the spreadsheet now, if it's low, I can probably get my manager to approve picking up a bill for something if it doesn't go overboard. I don't know if we end up having the whole 200 people show up. I don't know. Well, I don't think we can find a venue for that.
They will after you announce that VMware is paying.
That will change, yeah.
I'm going to post on the Slack now, encouraging people to sign up for it.
Okay,
so.
don't post that VMware is paying though. And
I will not.
anybody hearing this on the Zoom, that isn't true.
not yet committed. It's prospective. No, I will just post in the Slack that we would like people to sign up now, so that we can start to get our heads around where to have lunch and so on.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I've heard this event is likely to hit 12,000, the full capacity. So lunch might be crowded. I mean, this isn't like going to lunch in Las Vegas where you could perceive it as kind of an infinite supply nearby.
Yeah. So what day are you planning? Maybe Wednesday or?
Wednesday, I think, is okay with me. I'm sure whatever day we choose, somebody will have a conflict, but
yeah.
I guess we can do Wednesday. We could Thursday. I think if we did it, then it would be before our presentation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the way this has gone historically, we're all usually editing the deck right then. So maybe I'd avoid doing it right before we go on stage. Plus, they get tired of seeing us. I mean, if we...
Yeah, if we'll probably talk, give all the talk in private.
Yeah.
During the lunch, right?
We could do it in an evening, but the trouble there is that there actually is a KubeCon. If you Google for it, there's a KubeCon party list of various events sponsored by vendors. And there's something going on every night. So we'd be in conflict with that. What we could do is maybe have the group crash one and as a group just chat while we're attending some vendor's event. Okay, well, anyway, yeah, well, I guess as far as I know, Wednesdays is as good a time as any. And if we want to pencil it in for Wednesday at lunch, I don't have any
That's
objection.
cool. Yeah, works for me as well.
Okay, somebody can put that in the Slack channel, a link to the spreadsheet, and then we'll take
Just
it.
did. And said Wednesday. Yep.
Okay.
Wednesday lunch and link to the spreadsheet. Hopefully it gets some more people signing up.
All right, sounds good. Anything else? I know agenda-wise, we didn't have anything, but James, I thought last time, didn't you put something in the agenda and we never got to it?
So James reached me on Slack in private that he will be here on silent because he's on customer site. So I don't expect him to talk.
Oh, okay.
As well this time as well, yeah. But yeah, let's try to get some things going on after the KubeCon. So I think James had some interesting topics.
Hey, yeah, I can you hear me?
Hey, yeah, James.
Yeah, I just stepped into a conference room. my brain's fried. I can't remember what I put in there. Last time, what was it?
It should still be in there. If you've got it open, you can scroll down.
It's a provisioning. How we said it.
I see a name, by the way, on the attendees ARC. I'm not sure. Apologize if I just don't recognize your name, but if you're new, please speak up and introduce yourself. I think that the rest of us have maybe been on group meetings before.
So yeah, bootstrapping Kubernetes on the edge. I think.
Yeah. Okay, so dealing with multiple use cases where customers want to pre-install units with Kubernetes, and then have them, essentially either install a node in a failed cluster, or we're talking probably a 3-node physical environment, whether they're Intel NUCs or embedded boards or even 1U servers. They want to have it some mechanism that's standardized where they plug this server in.
Hello.
It boots
Hi,
up
everyone.
with Kubernetes, and then
I'm Archana. I work as a product manager with one of IoT industry called Litmus Automation. And I wanted to be part of these discussions to understand more on edge solutions. And
Okay.
I work in Toronto, so this time is convenient, so I could join today's call.
Okay. So this is the North America time, so you might find the other time slot, which is at 2-week intervals, more convenient. But you're welcome to join both. So James, you were talking about bootstrapping Kubernetes.
yeah, so
deployments.
they basically want to they don't know exactly which cluster it's going to go into, so they want it to some mechanism for the system to boot, for it to essentially self-detect and self-configure based on something like a voting system or whatever. So and I know this is somewhat beyond the scope, but I don't know if everybody's read the Chick-fil-A blogs that are out there.
Yeah. So let me get this
essentially
straight.
a la what Chick-fil-A is doing.
Yeah, so Chick-fil-A was deploying an entire cluster, masters and workers.
Yeah, well, and I think that's eventually where these customers want to get, is that they have a cluster come up and detect its identity with pre-installed systems that are vanilla, and essentially use something a la DH, like a Kubernetes DHCP type service, where it gets its identity and then decides who's going to be the masters and all that sort of stuff. So but the first problem they want to solve is, okay, we go in and configure this and lose a node. How do we have it automatically configure that one node when we replace it? So that's the first part of it.
Having a worker node join an existing cluster is a little different from starting from nothing. And especially starting from nothing with 3 potential masters or something, I don't know,
I figured,
do it, but I can't say I've ever heard of anybody who has solved this. So
yeah, well, it would need to be something that is flexible enough that it's rules based, so that you could have a rule set that is flexible, that you could define how it figures out who the master is, right? I mean, you could never write one thing that does it. You need some heuristic that you're able to populate.
yeah.
Chick-fil-A was able to do it because Chick-fil-A has everything defined, and they know what the heuristics are.
Yeah.
And they just define it.
Well, the interesting thing is whether you're anticipating a use case where you've at least got some sort of network already in place before you try to do this, and it has DHCP and maybe some DNS that you could look up well-known addresses. But
yeah, and I was thinking
where you literally start with nothing and are doing nothing but peer-to-peer. I suppose that
Yeah,
some might dream
I
of it.
assume that the requirement would be that you have at least DHCP or some way that these pick up a network identity that's assigned to each of them.
Yeah.
Because I mean, they've got to pick up an identity. So once they've got that identity, then it's a question of, okay, do we pick the, how do you pick the master? And then once you pick the first master, that sort of stuff. So it was just food for thought. And I don't know if this is something we want to talk about more, but I've seen more customers asking about this, including technology vendors that are saying that they want to do this. I had one technology vendor say that they want pre-installed Kubernetes so that they can essentially have appliances that they stick in.
Yeah.
That's actually exactly what I'm looking for. Do you know a way that I can pre-assign labels to worker nodes, which can basically switch clusters?
So what I was thinking was DNSSEC and Dane, you can do a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether you could use that and then pick the identity off of that and it's secure. And then based on that, have some service that is queryable to then pick up the Kubernetes identity. And then if it reboots, or reinitializes or gets wiped, and then you could have a different identity in that registry or whatever you call it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of what I was thinking, because I've had customers that have used DNSSEC and Dane, and it's real trustworthy, and you can piggyback other things off of the top of it.
Yeah. I guess that presumes that you have an outbound connection to something externally managed. For some things.
That's correct. Yeah.
I can't
that's
imagine
correct.
they'd ask local workers to configure DNS.
No. You'd have to have a way for these things to pick up at least a temporary network identity, DHCP, and then be able to get to cloud or data center services.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to see more requests for these types of things.
Here's another thing I can dream of, and that is to have, this isn't obviously built into Kubernetes, but there are some people out with edge applications that are essentially air-gapped, meaning like no internet. And I could dream of a scenario where central IT ships out USB keys that can be plugged into these systems that would imprint the ducklings with an identity as well. And
that would also,
you could
that would
maybe
also
do
work.
it one time and be done with it, chuck the things in the trash or not.
Yeah.
If you had to install certificates and things, that might be a good way to get those copied over too. And perhaps the process of this boot would scrape the thing out of that key and then erase it. And
I have exactly the
same
thought. Yeah, it's a starting identity that allows you to find your position in line. And yep.
So I was thinking that we could begin to gather requirements and throw around potential design solutions, and then see whether it's viable. And if it's viable, maybe we turn this into a project or something.
Yeah,
I reached out to the Chick-fil-A people just to see if they were interested in talking, and I haven't heard back. They're in Atlanta where I live, so I was hoping I could talk to them. I don't know what the value of them open sourcing their stuff would be, and I don't know that they would be willing to, but given my thoughts on it, I don't know how valuable it would be either. But I think picking a few use cases and beginning to sort of paper design some stuff around it. Maybe the disconnected use case that you're talking about, the use case of bootstrapping one that's connected to the internet, and then maybe one or two others, and then just sort of talk.
Maybe also something like device analysis. So you start basically your edge node in your cluster, and it kind of scans through which devices are detected. For example, you have USB cameras or whatnot, and these
Right.
devices are then detected, and all the scanner or the software for the camera system is then basically loaded by a daemon set.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, there may be instances where there is hardware. You may have a serial connection to a device on one particular node.
Yeah.
How do we represent that, and how do we share that connection among the cluster? I don't know that this is, first we need to solve the first problem, but I think that's also an issue of, how do we say I'm node 1 and I have direct physical access to this thing. You may have an application that needs access to it. How do we define all that stuff? Is it by labels or what? But I think that's another thing that we'll have to define going down the road.
I'm currently working with labels, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But still by hand. So I basically start my computer, and then I label the node, and then it gets the software I want.
Yeah, because I think this, if it's like a registry and identity, you could also begin to say, someone could create an application that would begin to label these things with if it's a warehouse and one has proximity to a Bluetooth sensor or something like that, then it could register that in some way. And then if I needed to interact with it, I could go and talk to the application that's on that node, something like that.
But I think this is heavily dependent on vendors and stuff you want to actually integrate.
Yeah.
Right. I think I'm
is
as
it
much as anything
possible
interested in
to
the
external to Kubernetes. I mean, that let's solve the Kubernetes bootstrap problem first, and then
No, I agree. I think, but I also want to just keep in mind these other use cases as we solve it. So I think if we can, I'll put together. Does everybody have access to Google Docs? I think everybody does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put a Google Doc together and I'll send it out to the list. And
what you can do is there is the membership alias. So what is it?
Okay.
Kubernetes IoT Edge.
There's the folder.
The common thing in all these SIGs is to actually just share it with the group, and then there is a sad history that if these things get published, that trolls go and edit this. So my advice is that you actually restrict it, not to anybody with the link, but to members of this group.
Okay.
But give them edit authority, and that's generally safe.
Okay. Excellent.
This is oh, sorry. Go ahead, James.
Oh, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, I think this would be beneficial, and then Kilton, it would give you something as well, to a service to integrate with from an IOFOG perspective.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Is I think if we solve this for a use case or two, then it would be like a guiding light toward figuring out how does this become an abstracted universal layer, right? Or approach. Yeah. So I think participating and solving it for a couple of stand-up instances would probably inform the entire group really well.
Cool.
So I had a brainstorm while we were talking about, originally I threw out, put a USB key in all of these, but upon further contemplation, an awful lot of the standard off-the-shelf consumer grade hardware these days has Bluetooth and maybe even the Bluetooth low energy.
Yeah.
What you could do is have the IT admins ship like a burner grade cell phone, one of these $20 cell phones. That the advantage is it presumably even has GPS in it, and kind of authenticates that this has ended up at the desired location and didn't get misdirected to or stolen by somebody who's not entitled to it. So it only works from the right location. And these nodes, when you say, how do they know how to connect? Even though in the final operational context, they never intend to be using Bluetooth, it actually establishes a proximity because it isn't going to go very far, but I would presume that it's safe to assume that if I've got 3 clusters in a Kubernetes node, they're installed very close to one another, and you just hold the phone near them, and they wake up expecting to find somebody on the air that is authoritatively imprinting them with their configuration.
Yeah, well, it could be a phone that, I mean, it could be a phone of the technician that's running an app or something.
Yeah,
It could also be a Bluetooth low energy beacon that's been affixed to the physical, like the warehouse shelf.
That's not a bad idea.
Yep, because those are super inexpensive and can last for years with the proper battery. And
That's a really good idea.
It's not the first time it's been exposed. That's actually some of the earlier demonstrations of the Bluetooth low energy abstraction layer in Eclipse IOFOG. We're demonstrating that a node could identify where it was without any GPS or anything by kind of proximity to a beacon. So this is starting to shape up pretty interesting. I had proposed.
Yeah, I don't think it would cost much more than USB keys. So
no, in fact, Bluetooth BLE beacons can be dirt cheap, and some of them are even flashable so that you can avoid having anyone understand your identities beforehand. I had put for the talk down in a couple weeks at KubeCon North America, I had put some info about, I could do a demonstration of Bluetooth low energy hardware abstraction on edge nodes. I don't know if it fits. I know we haven't yet figured out our thing, but
well, you can see the agenda. I mean, you have to put the agenda together like months before the event, right? So, and frankly, I certainly have never done a full deck that far in advance. So you kind of just do enough to get them to accept the talk. But as long as it fits whatever we put in the agenda, I guess the lesson to be learned is keep it as vague as possible. I think we said we'd give a couple demos. So if it fits under however we describe those demos, I'd be happy to do it as long as.
Great. Well, why don't we do a Bluetooth low energy location detection on Wake Up that can then pass that information along. That's a great demo because we can also demonstrate all of the Bluetooth low energy communication layer, right, which is a non-TCP/IP low power protocol layer or communication layer. So
sure, because we said we'd have protocol demos. So sure, it sounds like that qualifies. And then on top of that, we can throw out James' idea that as far as we know, nobody's done this before, but we'd like to have other people contribute use cases and call it feature requests and see if we can get volunteers from around the world to help build it.
Yep.
I'm in.
Cool.
Technically, as a Kubernetes working group, we're not supposed to own code. So we'd have to be delicate with the CNCF that this is like a sidebar project.
Right.
I think they will be happy to see some actual, deliverables out of it.
I don't think
even if it's be like a side project that can be eventually come to CNCF or whatever.
Okay,
we could also call it a proof of concept or something initially too.
Yeah. It seems like essentially the Kubernetes project really hasn't standardized much in the way of installers at all. It kind of seems to be done by vendors who put out distributions. And
the one thing we're starting to see is some standardization around cluster API.
mm-hmm.
But it's still we're still several years from how it is.
Yeah. But yeah, anyway, okay. I'm glad you brought up this subject because it's interesting and
I think it's unique, but I think it's solvable.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds to me like something that half the edge deployments could use too. I mean, when you think about it, a lot of these edge locations are not attended to by skilled IT people.
Correct.
So expecting them to go through a conventional install like you do in a data center isn't really going to work.
Yep.
The interesting thing with the idea of it being a cell phone is that it maybe could get some internet connectivity to draw in kind of latest versions of containers and things as you come up. If you had this idea that devices are FedExed out from some factory, the vendors are going to want to produce at volume probably don't want to do like last minute squirt the last updated version of Kubernetes out there. I mean, granted, the releases are quarterly, but there's been a history of a lot of security patches coming out intervals more like every couple of weeks. And if you're going to bring one up, you don't exactly want to bring one up with known vulnerabilities.
I think that any edge node that comes online from, and goes through the bootstrap process should probably include steps to verify what agent software, right, is running on the edge node before it begins running application layer software.
Yeah.
And
Okay, great. I'll create the doc and we can talk more in San Diego as well about it. But I'm glad everybody was receptive.
Yeah. And then Kilton, I think you're maybe the expert of the people on this call, but the other idea of the bootstrap is that I think that in general, you're going to want to apply certificates as part of this process too, and need a way to get those installed, right?
Yep.
Oh yes. Oh yes. You're going to swap out whatever process you go through to get ready to join the network or the cluster. Once you finish it, I think then you should receive your identity for being part of the application pool. And it should probably only last as long as you're valid, meaning that if you fall out of order in any sort of way, that we should be able to detect that and make you go through a process of recertifying. Yeah, a lot of thoughts about it.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is it gives you a mechanism for upgrade for these for upgrading Kubernetes, because you could use the same hardware and just pop in a USB stick or whatever and put it back to defaults and then let it drop new VMs on it and then let it pick up an identity rather than having to pre-configure everything.
Yeah.
That's great, and it should result then in a lot of Kubernetes ready pieces of hardware, right? So
Correct.
Commodity off-the-shelf stuff that you can just drop in, and I think that would spur a little bit more industry adoption too, if it's that easy.
Yep. If we can get to the point where company X builds an appliance, appliance, you drop 3 of them in a remote location, and they come up with the software and federate and just come up as nodes, then that's I think that's products being born there.
That's great, and it's also probably the breaking point between pilot adoption and full scale adoption.
Yep.
It includes this because the people that you have out in these edge environments are not the same types of technicians that would rack and stack in a data center.
Yeah, they're more mechanical than IT.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, I've got to drop. I just wanted to listen in and then bring this up. But
Okay. Well, thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah.
Great topic, actually.
Excellent. Well, I'll see you guys in San Diego.
Okay. I
Cheers.
just noticed it's already 44 minutes after the hour too. I mean, this went a while.
Time flies in this group, right?
Anybody got anything else out there? Let's try to see if somebody else has another good idea like this.
Could we do two completely new product concepts in one meeting?
I don't even know if Bluetooth low energy, if it would be viable if it looks enough like what's out there to have it look like a Pixie boot or something. I don't think any node scene has that as a BIOS option to say boot off Bluetooth low energy.
No, don't think anything. I think that stack doesn't even come up until after we're well into the above the bootloader. Yeah. But interesting what the future could hold, because it is the way that you do pairing of Bluetooth low energy devices typically the way that you give IoT devices their internet connection usually is you use Bluetooth low energy, which is you just basically need to stand near it to get it to get access to it via your cell phone. Then you provide it the Wi-Fi credentials, WLAN credentials via the Bluetooth low energy connection with an app, and then it reboots itself or whatever, and then it's online, and then you can see it through the web portal. I mean, this is not
Isn't
new.
Amazon Fire TV Stick doing that?
It might. I don't use that particular Amazon product, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, almost every, smart home device and stuff uses this process.
Well, here's another.
I found it hell of way creepy, because it gets like attached to your Amazon account and stuff, and it's like really weird because you kind of switch homes and everything still works, and you're just amazed by how good it actually works.
Yeah. Well, I think
the downside is if you ever sell the device to somebody, you could have something evil happen to the device.
Exactly.
But what is really cool when you add a new device from them, it already has Wi-Fi installed and just boots up, and it's just like way too easy.
Oh boy, yeah, that crosses over into the lines of if you make it so easy, then in the industrial space, I think we're dealing more with abstracted identities that have only meaning in the back end, not actual Amazon accounts. But who knows where Amazon's going to play next?
As a downside of that, I read an article recently out of I think I found it on Hacker News, but somebody observing that they had rented a car that was internet connected with a mobile phone app, and they went to the trouble to configure it, and this app then is anticipated you're the car owner, but in this case he was a renter, and it gave him the ability to remote start the car and open the doors, and he found out that no one had ever reset it months after he had rented this car, and he was still able to remote start the car after his couple-day rental. Lessons to be learned on there's positives and potential negatives and security exposures on that.
There is, and the first thing it makes me think of is if I'm a hired technician to go do an install at a factory that's Kubernetes at the edge, and then I decide to come back by on a Saturday, can I just go ahead and reboot the whole system with my handheld device that I use to bootstrap them? This is definitely.
Well, I think
that sounds
would
awesome.
probably be nervous, especially with disgruntled workers getting fired and having lingering credentials.
Yeah, it all points to, which is something that we already have exposed well in the security white paper from this group, but fixed identities at the edge are probably not a good idea, just as in general, that concept, because we put so much trust in things that we normally can protect, but you can't protect once the car is no longer your rental, right? It might be somebody else's problem, but the identity remains.
Yeah,
but I think Preston talked about this, I think 4 weeks ago, with this keycard idea, where you kind of sign off different processes, which I found really interesting.
That's right. I remember that. That was very interesting. Yeah.
Well, your idea of the Bluetooth beacon, if you envision that as something you'd epoxy down to a location, so that even if the equipment moves, it loses its identity, that'd be interesting.
Yep.
I had another thought on this bootstrap where we talked about wanting to pull upgrades as part of the boot up process so that you're on the most recent version as this thing gets installed. And one thing I think we really want to do with a multi-node cluster is make sure we only pull it down once, because a lot of these have limited bandwidth. And if I have 3 nodes, pulling down container images 3 times doesn't make sense. So maybe the first one to come up assumes a role of providing binaries to the subsequent ones.
Yeah, it's basically BitTorrent for container images at the edge. Some peer-to-peer capability, right, of being able to share over whoever got it first.
Yeah, and it could be BitTorrent. It could even be that the first one comes up through the Bluetooth Low Energy and then turns into a Pixie server for the other guys or something.
Yeah. On the note of where you mentioned, being able to detect the location and then make a change, one of the very first demonstrations of Eclipse IoFog before it was that project, but it didn't even have a name at the time. I did an install in a hospital to test location aware compute workloads, and it was an earlier version of the architecture, but when you moved we had little, Raspberry Pi boards, right? Because they have Bluetooth Low Energy in them and so on. When you moved it physically over to another location with the pharmaceutical cart, it could detect, based on Bluetooth Low Energy beacons, that you had entered into a space where the same ability to issue the medication was not valid. You were no longer in a protected space, and it locked out the drawers on the cart. So you could do some work in one room, but not in another, and it knew where you were. And so it shut down some of the interfaces. So there's pretty interesting potential here.
How solid are those with regard to spoofing? Like, I know people kick around the idea that you put GPS, but unfortunately hackers have definitely learned how to spoof GPS locations. And these Bluetooth beacons, are they reasonably secure with regard to imposters and situations like that?
Nope. but work could be done to provide a layer that allows you to understand if it's, to verify the identity of one. Right now, I mean, they broadcast on a pulse, and what they send out is, by kind of the definition, is accessible for everyone to read. And they really are just a beacon. Everybody can see it, meant to point away.
But is there anything to prevent even replay attacks and simple things like that, where hackers could whip something together with a software-defined radio really cheap?
No, there's not a way. There's not a way just using like the standard, beacon definitions that are there, iBeacon and Eddystone and whatever. But that doesn't mean that using something as a beacon can't be developed into a much more secure layer. If we could do a demonstration with the BLE beacon, I would say that the first thing we should point out is that serves as an easy demonstration to get started, but that's not the layer that we would trust in enterprise. But very good points, and sounds like additional material for the security white paper.
On a related note to that, I read another article about how somebody started coming up. I think the patents expired on those HID chips that are used pretty commonly for building access and things like that, and it has put out kiosks to duplicate these things for less than $10.
Yep, you can find it at Safeway in the Bay Area. You can get your house keys cut, and you can get your access card for your workplace duplicated at a kiosk at a Safeway. So if you have team members that just got hired and they're worried about losing their key card, they and all their roommates could have one before you know it.
Yeah, the article said they sell both the cards and even chips that you could potentially glue to your fingernail or your watch. And the sales point wouldn't be to have a backup, but just that it's more convenient. So you glue it to your fingernail so you don't have to carry around the ID card.
Yeah, there you go. So if you've always losing your house keys, to make it easier, let's just make 50 house keys and put them all over. Oh boy, that's just not good.
Okay, I think we've got another 6 minutes left. If anybody has any last minute topics or just wants to chat about anything, go for it.
Just one question about the use case. What is exactly now the plan? We kind of just write some ideas down, what we want to tackle first, or?
You mean the use case of booting up a Kubernetes cluster at Edge? Is that what?
Yes, exactly.
I think James said he was going to post a document, and I assume he'll put a little structure in it.
Okay.
And then I think just add whatever you like. I mean, after he left the call, we came up with a few more ideas. I think at this stage, the best thing to do is free format brainstorm mode, where if you've got anything potentially valuable to add, if it relates to something already there, add it in that part, but feel free to add a complete new section if you like. Yeah,
because what I was just thinking, what would be really nice is actually changing clusters. So basically, let's say you have your edge device with your camera system, and you just move the camera to a different location where another Kubernetes cluster is running, and then you just plug it into the network there, and kind of boots up into the system as well, and then grabs the camera software that is actually run there in this specific cluster. So you can basically transfer devices in between clusters to and manage the software by this way.
Yeah, so I think that's a little different from James, where he was talking specifically about Kubernetes cluster nodes, whereas
This is a
IoT
cluster node,
is
basically.
something a little different, right?
Actually, it is a cluster node.
Oh, it is a cluster node. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
So it
a
would be
full
joining a
fledged.
different cluster.
Sorry?
So changing its identity to become, it was a member of cluster A and it is changing to be cluster B, or is this
Exactly.
a, okay.
I'd
And the
say
best case would
this,
be to keep label.
okay, gotcha. So something stays with it, right? That as it
Yeah,
switches
exactly.
over. This is Moritz, I'd say this sounds like a great topic for the next one of these working group meetings. So to keep this rolling, and if we get the document set up from James there to kick it off, and you had some, I bet you we could spend a whole session just looking at the document and starting to get more structure into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that idea of moving from one cluster to another, I mean, ordinarily you'd expect that any worker node is knowledgeable as to the identity of its masters, and now those have changed. So there is a security aspect to that,
Yeah.
especially in this
let's
case, if it's a security camera you're talking about, you don't want it to become too easy to go seize control of the camera.
Yeah, let's talk about the use case or the vision of that. So I'm basically working in an laboratory environment for different manufacturing systems. So what we have here is different machining parts or different sensor systems lying around, and we do experiments with that. So you might have your production machine in the middle, and then you have your camera system, and you have your temperature sensor, and so on. And our stuff actually gets moved around a lot. So you might have your production system A, and you try to do your experiments on there, and then you go to another machine, and you take the camera with you because you just have one, but you just need it for this one experiment. So what you do is you move your camera to this location, and what would be nice is in the case where I move the camera to another cluster or into another machine, it kind of boots up itself, and you get your database with your camera system. You get your access interface, your web interface, everything with this movement of the node. So this is like heavily experimental based.
Yeah,
I would say.
I can think of another video camera related thing with more use case, and that is drones. So if you envisioned a drone that's moving from one region of a city to another, maybe handing off between clusters, or autonomous vehicles other than drones might be a similar thing. Interesting idea.
Not even autonomous ones. That is some work that I can't talk about the details of right now due to customer confidentiality, but I can say that in the automotive space, even without automation for the driving, so it's just a regular person driving, handoff is going to be a very important way to address the V2X scenarios that we're encountering.
Okay, it looks like we hit the top of the hour, and I actually have a conflict where I have to go to an event at this conference. So unless anybody has something to squeeze in 60 seconds, I think we'll call this a wrap, and I'll stop the recording and shut down the meeting.
So Steve, let's Kilton and me continue adding our material to the existing online deck.
Okay, and at some point, I'll either
at some point we'll reshuffle everything, right?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, and let's think on the Slack about everything going forward.
Okay, okay. Bye, everybody.
Perfect.
Thanks for joining.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.